I've got the blues, I've got the blues, I've got the alcoholic blues. No more beer, my heart to fear. Goodbye, whiskey, you used to make me frisky. So long, highball, so long, gin. Oh, tell me when you're coming back again. Blues, I've got the blues since the amputee.
Welcome, one and all, to our podcast, Torture Experiment, Schadenfreude on behalf of the audience, a podcast about a fanfic that in itself is a synthesis between Fallout, a popular series about a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and My Little Pony, a popular show about pastel horses.
And you know you're in for some good quality with just one layer of fanfic involving those very, very popular pastel horses. Everyone is I believe over the years on the internet come to associate those pastel horses, the fandom thereof, with nothing but quality. I'm sure it'll be fine.
This is intense irony on the behalf of our podcast. So, anyways, I'm Fi. I'll be the captain of this doomed voyage, and here is my first mate, Weird.
Sir Weirdington Esquire.
Yes, he is the passenger on this doomed ship. So, what's this all about? It's a podcast where I recap and analyze, to a certain degree, the contents of a My Little Pony fanfic that itself was, in fact, a recursion of a My Little Pony fanfic, and kind of just bitch about it for like an hour and a half, maybe.
We're going to apply literary theory so hard.
So, anyways, some context. The original series, Fallout Equestria, was written by an author by the name of K-Cat and was finished about 2011. It was written early enough that it only really incorporates the first season of the show, but it's a synthesis between this and Fallout storytelling. It's a post-apocalyptic wasteland focused around pastel horses. There's a gratuitous amount of violence, which is bizarre given that it's pastel horses, and the tonal dissonance is almost part of the charm, at least to me, as someone who enjoys garbage. Like that's a core element of my identity, is I enjoy bad things pretty unironically.
Meanwhile, I have an insatiable curiosity and a endless thirst for novelty. And I must know, my good co-conspirator, Fi, approaches this material, let's call it, with extreme enthusiasm, and I have been drawn into the dark well of his fascination. Time will tell if I can ever escape.
Yeah, we're both going to die by the end of this. So, in the coming weeks, I'm going to try to recap like at least one chapter, maybe more. We haven't really figured out the exact ratio. The chapters are pretty long. Like that's a big infamous thing about both of these stories, because we're working on the second, like, sort of not exactly sequel, not exactly spiritual successor, Project Horizons, which is a much worse story in my opinion. But the chapters are very long and they're very verbose in their content, so they're hard. They're going to be hard to digest. But we're going to see if we can get through multiple episodes. Otherwise, this is going to take forever, and we're probably going to be skeletons by the end of this.
All right. So with the initial preamble of preambles out of the way, dear audience, I beg you to turn away now. This is your final opportunity to escape, because there is so much more preamble to go. There are so many things that need to be understood before we continue. And yet, we press forward. Fi, how does our story open? What is the first paragraph of text?
So I felt that this first paragraph was important to read out in full because of it's a good tone setter for the kind of like narrative we're going to be focusing on primarily. So to leap into it, we begin with this: war never changes. It had consumed our home. A war fought by foreign aggressors until great and terrible magics had been unleashed to burn all the world to ash and dust. Only our constant devotion to the princesses had carried us through the terrible war, just as our unwavering faith in the Overmare maintained our continued survival within the earth. Trust the Overmare. Obey the Overmare.
And the laughter of thirsting gods, for in the year of our pony there is only war.
So yes, the tone of this particular work is fairly grimdark, and so I guess like the question becomes immediately like, why, like why am I doing this to you, both weird as our audience surrogate and to you the audience, and why am I doing this to myself to read it? Well, because I think it's important. Fall Equestria was kind of like a not a huge thing, but it was like sort of a minor thing for being an oddity, in the same way that like My Immortal but in a much like lesser extent, things like 50 Shades of Grey. Like people know about bad fan fiction, but the idea of like bad fan fiction that kind of inspired worse fan fiction that is like so deeply troubling on such a fundamental and elemental level that like I can't even like 4 to 5 years later, it can't really escape me. So
I would say that in addition to I believe it is important to note, dear listener, not only is this deeply insipid, that I heard you like fanfic. I heard you like grim dark fanfic. So I got you some fanfic in your fanfic. This is a tome. This is in excess of 800 pages.
yes,
Nearing 1,000.
yes,
And worst of all, it has, God help us, it has had sufficient cultural impact that, I'm going to lean in close for this, it is printed. There is sufficient demand that people have bought physical copies of this thing, of this abomination, of this abstraction of an abstraction of a hybrid.
yes. That's the important part. Yes.
Okay, so now that we've given you sufficient understanding of the weight of this thing, let me ask an important question. Whose perspective was that first paragraph told from?
Yeah, we were arguing with this before, but like there doesn't. It just seems to be like a vague narrator. Oh, it actually hit me this reading, the second reading of it, who it might have been, and it's much worse for that. But it seems to be like from a like so. The important context is that the story is primarily a first-person perspective narrative, which is fairly common in the genre of Fallout Equestria fanfics, which is a thing that I can say aloud and it'd be true. God damn it! But in the genre, they're typically first-person perspectives because it's all about like the personal struggle of a given particular character, and that narration just sort of comes out of nowhere. It's sort of like a pre setting ethos that kind of sets the tone of the narrative, which is worrying.
To be fair, this is a fairly common thing in like not like novellas, like that so often a lot of authors enjoy the pretense of having some italicized text to open up a given chapter with, some sort of in-setting poem or quote from some famous figure within setting. It is a little confusing that there isn't like, usually to like establish something about your setting, you'll then have like a market as said by someone and so, or like some context for what the hell that was supposed to be.
Yeah, it just seems to appear out of nowhere, but this gives us a good jumping off point to lead into the description of our protagonist. So we are focused on the protagonist character of Blackjack. Blackjack is a unicorn pony, which means she has a little horn that allows her to cast magic, but not very well, because one of the primary core elements of Blackjack is she's basically a fail son. Like she's basically a security pony in a vault society that is completely sequestered from the world around them, and she's not a very good cop, despite the fact that her like mother is the head of security in this very like matriarchal society that bizarrely all positions in the society are inherited directly, like matriarchally, linearly. So she's destined to become the head of security despite being completely incompetent at it. which kind of already sets our pace for a person who is basically completely useless. So we're initially greeted with a relatively mundane story of her like initially like waking up, showering, interacting with other characters, and then getting brushed up against another set of the security characters who named Daisy and Marmalade, who are basically are kind of like rogue thugs, are like those two guys in black, the Pulp Fiction sort of archetype.
The Vandermeer and Croup, the Jules and whatever
whoever his name was, the not cool one.
Yeah, the one that wasn't played by Samuel L. Jackson, the one the Jules and Travolta.
Yeah, just John Travolta, not even his character. She's so incompetent that even as a unicorn, despite the fact that unicorns in setting are capable of casting a whole bevy of spells, Blackjack is like incredible, like even so incompetent that all she can really do is the basic telekinesis magic that unicorns are all like gifted with at birth. So yeah, she's a security pony. She's incompetent. She's lazy and lame. And I guess this is a good time to launch into where it talks about the stable proper. Like, so a stable is the terminology used for a fallout shelter that's designed in theory to protect people from the blast of an apocalypse. But in reality, they're most of them are social testing experiments done by the stable tech to determine what the best way that ponity, whatever, the equivalent of humanity but for horses, their best outcome for societies once the bombs like radiation is. In the case of Stable 99, which is our titular, like the next titular, like our focus story, Stable 99 is a matriarchal society that's driven around the idea of essentially like recycling. Like everything's inherited, and then on top of that, they don't have any way of producing food except for through recycling organic material back into food. So when you die or you shit or anything, it gets recycled into edible food, which are basically like stale tasting hay flavored chips. This isn't important. That's the worst part. Like, the reason why I'm putting a bunch of emphasis on this is because since this is a story that's primarily about the apocalypse, the vault doesn't matter. Like there's so much time spent on explaining a detail that isn't the critical focus of the narrative. But
so how many pages are devoted to the exquisite tapestry of this landscape we will never meaningfully explore or see again?
So my PDF says 35 pages, and it's maybe half of them is dedicated to just explaining the notion of this matriarchal society. Yeah. Oh boy, that's gonna be a recurring theme.
That's so that's a heck of a tone setter. So
yes.
So it kind of puts me in mind of one of those sort of Buddhist meditation rituals wherein a monk will spend months painfully, exquisitely producing a beautifully rendered portrait out of sand and then kick it.
Yes, it's basically it's incredibly immaterial for basically no reason. We're then introduced to the cast of characters outside of the bully characters. There's I'm not doing this in order, but like it's just the people that are introduced. There's the overmare, who is the person who runs the stable. That's also matriarchally decided, and it's incredibly stupid. She's basically a tin pot fascist. She's a total brat that wants every single aspect of the stable under her boot or hoof. Fuck it, whatever. There's Rivets, who is the only person keeping the whole stable together. She's the head of engineering, and engineering is constantly tasked by the stable basically being broken because like an incident happened that it refers to multiple times in the story in this chapter, wherein the males of this matriarchal society decided to revolt and break out of the stable, and that broke the stable so completely that like they're sort of running on fumes. There's Jin Rummy, who is Blackjack's mother and basically the only like mentally competent character in the whole thing, because like the Overmare is paranoid, and Rivets is also paranoid, and Jin Rummy is just trying to keep the whole thing together. She's the only character in this group I like. That'll become a common theme. There's also Midnight, who is a pip buck technician, which I guess is a good time to explain what a pip buck is. A pip buck is a send up from
Like a Fallout Pip
Fallout.
Boy.
Yeah, like a Fallout Pip Boy. But the Pip Boy itself is to describe it for people who don't know is basically a arm mounted computer. It's like an iPod that's just bolted to your arm and it has all of your relevant data.
So wait, I'm a little confused. So it's a pick buck in a world full of horses. So is Vault Tech run by deer or
No. So a thing about nomenclature that's in these kind of fanfics is that they tended to note like aged characters as stallions and mares. So like an adult male would be a stallion, an adult female would be a mare. So to contrast this, young men would be called bucks, and young women would be called fillies. The problem with this is that buck is also used. It's not how that works at all. They sometimes use the word gelding to describe a young stallion, but like very rarely.
Well, that is also not how that works.
Anyways.
That means another thing.
Yes, it does. Well, to be fair, I think gelding is the equivalent of calling somebody a cuck. That's pretty much what it is.
Okay.
But anyways, so this leads me to talking about the fact that buck is a stupid word that gets used multiple times for different meanings. So a buck is a kick in the setting, but it also could be a swear word, the pip buck itself, a young male, or a kind of drug that is basically steroids, just called buck. And you do get into situations where characters are basically going smurfity smurf, the smurfing smurfs, like very dumb, but it's a holdover from the original story, which in itself is a holdover from just broad MLP fan fiction writing. Like this is all stuff that just kind of got adopted in through other stories.
So that's kind of odd that like. So I'm given to understand that this is an incredibly mindlessly, tonally dissonantly gory story, and yet that they're avoiding actual curse words by using like.
Oh no, they still swear.
Like buck. Oh.
They still swear. So they'll say fuck. Like there are paragraphs that are next to each other. Like it's one paragraph after another where someone says buck you, and then later somebody says fuck you, and it's the same character doing this.
Is this an early oversight that will like the author will grow out of?
Time will tell.
Oh boy.
Anyways,
boy.
The last couple of characters to describe that have any importance to our play, because the first story also kind of focused, like the first chapter is kind of a murder mystery in the way that like it's a murder mystery that is entirely bored with the idea of a murder mystery, so it's just in the background.
Our protagonist is a cop, and the murder mystery is incidental. Okay, all right.
So
you know, I knew what I was. I know what I'm here for.
It's to die.
I should have been prepared. I
I
have, dear listener, I have these exquisite butts here with me. I'm currently doodling as we record, and these exquisite asses I am bringing to life. Give me great aid and comfort in these dark times. Anyway, as you were saying, Fi.
So, anyways, to introduce our last couple of characters, there's I believe an Earth Pony by the name of Duct Tape, who died mysteriously through some sort of failure. There's some suspicion of foul play, but it's sort of undermined by the notion that since the stable is falling apart constantly, these things just sort of happen. Like the Overmare replaced the previous Overmare by her mother getting crushed by a door malfunctioning, as an example. So she's replaced by her young daughter Scotch Tape, who is also only really matters because in later chapters she'll matter, but right now she's just a young character in an engineering job. And the last character we get to talk about is the probable committer of this murder, who had gone missing right around the time that Duct Tape happened, which is a character by the name of P21, which P21 isn't a name. That seems obvious. One of the problems with this horrible matriarchal society is that men are basically regarded as breeding stock almost entirely. They only exist for recreational and reproductive reasons. They live in the medical wing facility that is they have to be rented out, and the entire structure is incredibly disgusting. but it's also disgusting because of how deeply dismissive like all of the characters are of it. Like Blackjack herself, who's pretty morally gray for a lot of worrying reasons, kind of dismisses that out of hand as it's the only way the system can work, because since the men uprise at one point, like uprose, whatever, at one point they might do it again, so we have to prevent them from ever doing it again by locking them into the situation.
So I think it should be noted that I'm squinting very hard at the ceiling as I listen to this. and something like, so at a glance, one would assume this is sort of a clever reference to Boy and His Dog, in which the titular boy is captured by like an underground like vault dwelling society who harvests his semen because like none of like they need fresh genetic stock that is not sterilized by radiation. But in A Boy and His Dog, he was tied to a machine, and the relevant biomaterial was extracted directly from him. The fact that the author has like made it a point that like they're used for recreation as well as like practical purposes strikes me as the kind of like, oh, woe is me power fantasy, like oh, I'm just meat for women to use and enjoy. I'm so virile yet put upon.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's bad stuff. But anyways,
he is.
So he's implicated in this murder. To cut out a very, very long sequence that kind of doesn't matter, Blackjack has her day and is shit on by basically everybody, and then she goes to a poker game with a bunch of the engineering ponies because she's trying to be one of the guys, kind of thing. And the engineers all suspect her because she's a cop, which I mean, yeah, whatever. She's a cop. So she sort of gets ousted out after she sort of realizes she's not welcome. I have a point in here that in my notes that just says all pony cops are bastards, because there is a bizarre like line throughout the whole thing of like security force abusing their power, like pretty much completely unchecked, which is kind of uncomfortable. But anyways, she leaving this, she goes on her normal routine and bumps into P-21 in disguise because whatever. And he's trying to steal something, which it becomes obvious that he's trying to escape somehow and doesn't like that's supposed to be impossible because the door is sealed. Anyway, so she takes him back because she's doing her due diligence as a cop and arrests him, and they go back to the holding cells and bump back into Daisy and Marmalade, the two bullies, who then promptly bust P-21's leg up so bad that he can't, like, it breaks. Which, if anyone knows anything about horse anatomy, that would kill him effectively.
Don't worry, Fi. These are pastel horses. They have very thick limbs. It's fine.
Thick, powerful limbs.
It's fine.
But yeah, Blackjack takes some pity on him and dopes him up with some painkillers, which doesn't exactly fix a broken leg, just makes it hurt less. Something I forgot previously is that when Blackjack and P-21 bump into each other initially, 21 makes a bunch of weird allusions to knowing them in some mysterious tone that isn't explained until fucking chapters later. And I guess one last detail that I forgot to explain about the whole pony breeding system is that like the nomenclature comes from the fact that he of the 40 males that existed within this 300 body vault, they're all named either Pony for Earth Pony or Unicorn with U. And then they're labeled based off of which one in the order they are from youngest to oldest. So P1 would be the youngest male, and P20 would be the last one. And then when they hit 21, they're retired because P1 got born.
It's time for carousel.
Yes. So P-21 slated for
Logan's
retirement.
Run's joke, people. Hope you're hip enough for my Logan's Run gags.
It's too good. It's way too good. But anyways, then they get sent. They go into the holding cells basically as the actual plot starts happening of this chapter. Like anything of any substance starts really occurring. But I wanted to mark this very specific line of P21 describing. Blackjack describing P21 as a reluctant, wounded, pissy male because he was kind of rude to her because she's his oppressor directly.
Right? Yes, drow ponies. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's drow ponies.
Yeah, the worst, most like sort of grognard like drow riding. Okay, that's where we are.
Yep. It only gets worse from here, folks. But anyways, they get sent into the prison, and Blackjack, because Daisy and Marmalade don't like her. Well, it turns out Daisy doesn't like her. Marmalade doesn't care because she's whatever. She's not important. None of this is important. I keep having this moment of like I should explain this, but at the same time, like none of this matters. This is chapter 1 of a 77 chapter like thing where these characters appear basically here and never again. But it makes an exhaustive detail talking about these people.
I mean, honestly, like, how are we to appreciate the beauty of the sand canvas before the author's foot comes in the middle of it? It's the foot does not have like the same sort of impact, forcing us to confront the finite reality of things if we do not get ample opportunity to experience the fullness of the portrait.
Anyway, so the plot actually occurs. It's revealed that the Overmare has been setting up this big paranoid plan where she wants like total control over the stable because she believes that like Rivets is going to double cross her inevitably, and she wants to preempt that. And it's revealed that she had been communicating with the outside world that was thought to be lost. And StableTech, the company that runs the stables, is coming in and they're going to help fix the problem. They just need access into it, and they need something that's on their mainframe, which was the thing that P21 was looking for vaguely, and Duct Tape kind of died for, as it revealed. Like she found it and then was killed. And then there's an audio recording that's found about Duct Tape that reveals that 21 was kind of using her as a way to escape out of this. I also forgot that like Duct Tape also was in love with P21, which leads into all sorts of wacky problems. Regardless, she finds the program that they're looking for, which is the MacGuffin of the plot. There's a slight mention from Blackjack talking about how she doesn't want to call out Daisy and Marmalade for their actions, which I just have written here as thin blue pony line because it's super fucked up. But yeah, as they're trapped inside the cell, they try to escape, and 21 reveals that he's literally hidden a screwdriver and bobby pins up his ass if he ever needed to escape, and they use that to pick the lock and escape out the cell. And
this is officially an early aughts Newgrounds video.
It's so bad. They escape. They round the corner to find a pony that they don't recognize, who is garish and unshaved and grotesque looking and covered in open sores and wounds and has like yellowed eyes from jaundice, and is clearly a horse from like outside of the wastes, and they murder it pretty violently. Like something that's going to be a strain to talk about in the story because I'm kind of just going to ignore it most of the time, is that there's a lot of dedication given to like very gory murders.
Does the zombie horse like get a word in before they're like?
I think they say something inane and crazy. Like they
they are converted into chunky salsa.
Well, she also kills somebody. I think it was a random character that wasn't named out of these. Like it's not definitely not Daisy, Marmalade, Blackjack, or P21 that get killed. Blackjack then trying to figure out what happens, talks with Midnight, the pit buck technician from earlier, and they figure out what the actual program is. It's some sort of bizarre super program that once it's put onto a pit buck, it's etched there forever. Like it burns onto it and it can't be removed, which is pretty convenient. And it's mentioned initially, like the first time by name as EC1101, which does not roll off the tongue at all. I'm going to fuck it up every single time I say it. It's some sort of super program, and it's basically the One Ring. It's the magic MacGuffin. The whole story is focused around. It's insufferable.
The Maltese OS.
The Maltese OS. Anyways, I guess moving on to the next one. We're then given like little snippets of like conflicts that happen where they're murdering like raiders as they're like wandering around. They then like catch wind of some characters talking, which just talks about the idea that like the raiders that they had sent in are mostly chaff, like they're just crazed monsters that they just use as like as a first a first in force, and then the actual smart horses stay back and clean up the rest. And they belong to factions of some kind. They're referred to as gangs, and we're given name drops of gangs, which actually matters, but not till later. One of them being the Flash Phillies, and the other one being called the Half Hearts. And they all work for a group known as the Reapers, and we don't know what these are obviously yet, but it's coming. And they're all working for a guy named Deus, and this is our first name drop of him, and he's some sort of scary, sinister pony.
God.
Yeah, his name is Deus Ex Machina, but it's shortened to Deus.
Is it? Great.
Great.
And then?
And then after they slaughter a bunch of horses, they meet up with Jim Rummy, which is again Blackjack's mother, and she's shown to be a total badass who murders the fuck out of everything.
Oh, the often surrogate's mom is really cool. That's what an exotic turn for this sort of thing. You don't say. Tell me more.
Around this time is when we're first introduced to the one of the narrative concepts which is like the SATS system, which is a ripped off of Fallout's like weird VAT system, and it's essentially like a magical bullshit spell that allows you to like auto target opponents and kill them even faster and more efficiently than you normally can. I'm only really bringing it up because it talks about it a lot, especially in the early chapters, until like later on the author just kind of gets bored of dealing with it all the time.
You can only describe a skull imploding
so many times. They then find out that they then see Deus for the first time, and he's revealed to be like a colossal horse made of metal, basically. Like he's some sort of giant Terminator robot horse cyborg with like guns mounted to him, and he likes to say the C word a lot, because the only real class, like the only way of really separating the main villains from the heroes in this morally gray setting is they just say worse swear words.
I mean, if everybody's indifferent to the goddamn Soylent Green engine in the background, then like, yeah, I guess that's all you've got left. By the way, is it ever just who killed Duct Tape in the first place? Like,
I believe it takes chapters and chapters later, but I think it's B-21. If I'm remembering correctly. It's been several years since I've read this through, but it also just might have been an accident. I don't remember. I like it's honestly just like it's just left as a plot point. Anyways, let's see. He swears a lot. It's deeply problematic. We're given there's also like something I forgot like when I was going through my notes. There's also like a lot of like there's already like a lot of problems with the usage of like rape as a drama, like which is like a personally like a personally like a storytelling tactic I hate, of like, well, we need the bad guys to be bad. What are they doing? Oh, they're raping a character in the background, and it's horrible. Like,
that's
not the bad part. But
that's not the bad part. I was about to say how that's typical of like bad parts. Like that's typical of like. I'm an author with like limited moral compass, and so my protagonists are fundamentally monsters, but I need them to be morally superior to the bad guys. So the bad guys will rape a bunch.
Yeah.
So what's the hit me! I got it. I'm pounding my chest. I'm ready. I'm tightening my abs. I'm ready for it.
So
just hit me with the bad part.
So the reason why I consider to be like this to be the bad part is it's Blackjack's response to this, because like since it's a matriarchy and Blackjack is implicit with this matriarchal society, she regards the concept of a male raping a female being like somehow deeply more monstrous to her. Like she's like, well, you know, sometimes like women rape the men, and that's the thing that happens, and like it's a crime, but like whatever. But like a man to do that, oh, it's scandalous. I've never heard of that. It's so much more abhorrent to me now. Like it's this horrible dissonance. Like I kind of like I astrally projected for a while, thinking about like how this is the big umbrage that the main character takes with it. It's not that it's happening. It's that it's happening incorrectly to them. This isn't the order of things, as far as she's concerned. So yeah, that's a trend that starts really getting established later on. Okay, so let's move on from that horribleness. I also have a point about how Blackjack, despite being a total loser, is very good at killing people. Like it initially could be chalked up to the usage of sats to like murder people, but like
Yeah, diegetic vats is a pretty good cheat.
but there is also constant examples of her like a person tries to shoot her with a shotgun and it turns out to be unloaded because they're an idiot, so she like rips it out of their hand, their telekinetic hands, and loads it and blows their face off with it, kind of thing, and like gun butting people and doing all sorts of crazy shit, basically doing amazing cool gun kata. And this is supposed to be like if we're gonna talk like a step back and it's supposed to be like a video game, it's a level 1 video game character killing a bunch of high level characters with crap guns. But if we zoom back into the story, she's also supposed to be like a pretty soft security pony. Like she's not even supposed to be particularly violent about it. She's just kind of inept and complicit, and she's really good at it for some reason, which is really worrying.
So minor digression. This I'm getting strong flashbacks of So I'd far be it from me to elevate the competition, but there's another podcast in something like this vein called the Terrible Book Club, and one of their premiere episodes is Monster Hunter International by Larry Correia.
Mm-hmm.
And this very strongly reminds me of that episode regarding that book, because Larry Correia's self-insert is said to be a shabby, slobby sort of guy, just a computer programmer with a middling physique, and he describes his character with having the proportions of a gorilla, like a 20-something inch like chest.
I'm sorry?
And incidentally being a master of all firearms. So, while kind of grotesque, I'm sorry if this is fairly typical of the genre, the self-insert who's just, is just kind of a miserable lump who can't do anything except slaughter 10,000 ninjas.
There's also a lot of points made about Blackjack also not having friends because she's a cop, not having cop friends because she's too soft, no consistent romantic partners because she's a disaster. Something I forgot to touch on early on is that character Midnight. The reason that she was like knows her is because she's trying to sleep with her. And then there's a casual line given that is like deeply worrying because I can see into the future and I know things from that happen in later chapters. There's a person who asks like, "Oh, I didn't even know you slept with mares," and she's like, "Well, and she just kind of shrugs, and that's her response to it. That's a deeply worrying presentation of a character who's like not straight. I guess for some context, in the main story of Fall Equestria, which kind of set this precedent, the protagonist is like pretty like confirmed lesbian. Like that's kind of a big core element of her character. Like a core element of her character is her not really finding women that like want to like that not want to date her, but she can't date because they're either trying to kill her or they're just like deeply emotionally unavailable in some way. But regardless, that's a digression anyways. But so
the protagonist of this tale has vestigial lesbianism.
Sort of as a holdover, really, too.
All right.
Yep.
So
it's going to be real insufferable like 70 chapters later when this plot point comes to head and I get to scream really, really loud about how sexuality works for like an hour.
Oh boy. Okay. Anyway, so we're escaping the vault.
That's our last little part. So they see Deus and they're like, okay, we can't handle this guy. The Overmare is completely borked everything. The only way they can get out is that they want
gear.
is they want the MacGuffin, the Maltese OS, the Maltese.exe. So their plan is incredibly stupid. They one of the people they killed, they steal their clothes and put them on Blackjack as an effort to disguise herself. And they make a big point. The story just sort of stops to make a point about how her porn size is really small because it's a dick joke and they're common in the story. And I'll probably point them out every single time because they get real annoying real fast. But it's Blackjack has a metaphorically small dick. I can't imagine where that's coming from. Cough, cough, projection, cough, cough. So she pretty much skillfully like kind of fools everyone because apparently everyone's an idiot, and she's helping P21 escape because she takes some pity on him, and P21 is basically, I just want to be done with this whole vault thing because he hates everybody and he hates women, and hates everything. He like I've talked this in length to many people, but like one of my biggest problems with the story and kind of why I wanted to talk about the story in the first place is the fact that P21, despite being a aggressive, woman-hating monster of a person who is incredibly judgmental of all the female characters he ever comes in contact with, is the moral compass of the story.
Well, you see, Fi, he's so virile and yet so put upon.
That's a good way to describe him.
Oh God, it is. That was meant to be flippant. Fi, that was meant to be flippant.
So the worst part about it is I get to talk about for a while in this story how I kind of like P21 for a while, and then a thing happens that makes him ruined forever. And that's going to be a consistent problem with the story. Is there's going to be ideas that I enjoy that get ruined entirely by the execution. But anyways, we're almost done. The actual direct text. So they dodge past Deus. The big wall of meat and metal he is. They childishly insult him and escape out the front door because the door had been removed because they had got in that way. And it's kind of a weird anticlimactic ending because it really just ends with like Deus like furiously shouting the C word at them like a fucking Saturday morning cartoon villain, and the credits roll more or less on the episode. Like it's so bizarre.
What sort of Saturday morning cartoons were you following, Fi? I know that like standards and practices are different in Canada, but
yeah, it's a mess. It's like, so I guess like to not be just pissing on this story entirely, there are elements I do kind of like. There's establishments of themes that go on to not necessarily be good, but they definitely are consistent. There's a big focus on the idea of like Blackjack being someone who's like very like placatable, and she's very like she's very in group. She just keeps her head down and follows the pack for a long time in this story, and this gets established early on. There's a big focus on like very totalitarian fascist like city state stuff that first starts off in this vault. Whether it makes any points about these is gonna be part of the exploration of this of this, but for now I'm just gonna say like I kind of like that they're there, not necessarily well executed. But yeah, the chapter ends with them escaping the vault, and it'll carry on to the next chapter.
So I didn't want to weigh you down with too many digressions, but now that we're here, I have a very very important sort of setting question. So in the sort of lore of My Little Pony, there's this thing with cutie marks.
Mm-hmm.
That like around when a pony comes of age, their sort of genetic destiny, their entire focus in life will be stamped on their ass by an unseen magical force. How does that work for for manfolk in like the slave breeders?
So a little bit of like larger scope context in Fall Equestria, the cutie mark stuff tends to be more like it tends to be less literal exceptionalism and more like something you might necessarily be good at. Like there's a character who has a shotgun cutie mark. There's a character who has like an abstract whatever cutie mark. The titular character, like the primary protagonist of Fall Equestria itself, has a pipbuck as their cutie mark. That's a whole thing that we're not touching right now. Blackjack herself has Blackjack. She has a queen and an ace of spades on her rump. For the males of the setting, of Stable 99, they have the male symbol, like the male Mars symbol, as their cutie mark, and then they use a magic marker to denote how many like what iteration they are with the number of dots. So in the case of P21 is the male symbol, and then 10 dots, 10 white dots underneath it, and then one additional white dot. It has some worrying implications, doesn't it?
Yeah. It
Um,
that like
the idea of the
okay,
genetic destiny is breeding.
all of them.
All of them.
Quite the coincidence.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Dark Revelations had. Wait a minute. It just occurred to me. Like, so typically, like names are associated with it. What were the Daisy and Marmalade?
So to my recollection, Daisy and Marmalade kind of bizarrely break this trend for kind of no reason. And if I remember, Daisy literally has a daisy, and Marmalade has a jar of marmalade.
And this
But denotes security ponies somehow. Whoa.
moreover, leg breaking psychopaths.
Yep.
Hmm.
Insidious Marmalade.
I'm gonna right. Okay.
Oh boy,
I
isn't
think
it?
I've digested it. I've taken it into my being, and there
And
it will rot me from the inside. But I will do so without comment.
is there any more notes you have for me, Weird?
No, other than so if the VATS system or not VATS system is diegetic, is there any other like sort of weird artificial holdover from the Fallout games?
Well, I guess this gives me a good opportunity to talk about stuff like the technology of the setting to a degree. I'm not going to go super in detail because some of the stuff just works better me throwing him at you for the first time and ruining your life about it. But the primary technology that focuses around is the pip buck, and the broad focus in the setting is that it's a technology is essentially literally sufficiently advanced, like advanced magic. Like it's magic has gotten so complex in the setting that it just replicates technological advancements that we would see. Like the computers that they have run on these things called spell matrices, and spell matrices are just highly elaborate spells that have been like placed on a network of basically circuits, but they're not circuits. They're like, well, they're circuits, but they're not like literally like they're not silicon chips. They're magic crystals that hold spell charges, and that's how a lot of things run. Like in a similar example, the equivalent of the water chip that is in Fallout, which converts water into drinkable water, and this is called a water talisman, which literally just does the same thing. It just turns water into drinkable water.
Okay, so for a lot of that stretch of words, I have to admit something to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know the sort of like wailing of the damned that plays in 2001: A Space Odyssey when the protagonist is passing through the Stargate?
Yes.
My eyes glazed over and I heard only that. Around the time you said magic matrix.
Yep. So something else I forgot to explain because it's in elaborate detail in the original story, but not in this. There's also guns in this setting.
Well, we've established that, like we've described how our totally inept, a passively minded protagonist beat a person to death with a shotgun.
But it's important to note how those guns are operated. So it makes
No, it isn't. But I have a feeling I'm going to be told.
So it's important to note how they're operated in this setting because and this is very dumb.
Oh.
Horses don't have hands, right? These are literally passive horses.
They do not.
So you'd have to think, how do they use them? And the answer that's given up for it is that all guns that wouldn't be the equivalent of a two-handed like rifle are mouth fired. This leads into a lot of problems that don't make any sense, like how do any horses have teeth?
Very strong teeth. Teeth are magic.
Teeth magic. Teeth matrix. They
You thought it
fired
was
these
friendship
guns.
that was magic. No, it was in fact the teeth all along.
The real friends with the teeth we made along the way. They fire these mouth-fired guns, including shotguns, without virtually any recoil for basically no reason. But they do make mentions of recoil. This gets extra dumb when they have to use guns that are bigger than this. They have these things called battle saddles. And battle saddles are literally saddles that guns hook to the sides of, and they have complicated reloading and firing systems that allows them to shoot them despite not having hands. We will get to those eventually, but like when I was describing Deus and saying that he had guns mounted to the sides of him, it's because he had a battle saddle. And specifically a heavy battle saddle, which allowed him to hold like I think they're flat cannons. I can't remember. Like it describes them very briefly in this part, but like I believe they're either Gatling guns.
A weapon
or...
to surpass Metal Gear.
Yes. This story is going to have very, very, very many Metal Gear Solid references in it. It's going to have very many anime references. It's going to have a huge plethora of references to Fallout, obviously, and My Little Pony. But it's the sheer staggering amount of anime and Metal Gear stuff woven into the story, and it's a lot. I guess is the point. Like to not give away too much, it's a lot. But that's also part of the fun of me talking about this thing is I feel other people have to know about this, and I don't know why. Like I'm consumed, like entirely by the desire to share this stupid, terrible story that ruined my life. I'm going to leave with we're about to wrap up because we're almost done for time.
So I take it you have two things left, and I am emotionally and spiritually prepared for them. Once again, the last few things you said were slightly drowned out by the wailing of the Stargate. As my eyes lose the ability to focus on any given object in my environment. But now they have turned buttward, and I have these beautiful rendered asses on my sketch pad in front of me, and they will carry me through to the finish line.
So my last 2 points, and I jumbled them up a little bit, but my main focus that I wanted to convey with this story is that like I know to some degree that the author of this like suffered pretty heavily with depression throughout the entirety of the writing of the story, and a lot of that is very clearly presented onto the page. So I want to make it clear that I'm not really like necessarily mocking them, and if I'm mocking them, it's like in a loving way. Like the story is incredibly bad, but it's not like because it's just bad. It's bad because of like interesting things that are worth talking about it being bad. And I hope that that's conveyable to an audience broadly. I don't know that's the one thing I wanted to say. And the last thing I wanted to say was the game this stupid story has a leveling system in it, and Blackjack levels up through the course of the story, I guess by murdering a lot of people and completing the first quest of escaping. I want Weird, I guess, to guess what the first perk is that Blackjack ends up with.
So I don't have exactly an encyclopedic knowledge of the various quirks in Fallout. At a guess, because it's related to escaping inescapable, like something like escape artist or flim flam. The early games had a pretty remarkable one called Jinx, wherein like everyone sucks all the time to a pretty extraordinary level. I myself am sorry to say that I've only played a little bit of the only Fallout game I've played myself was barely into the first portion of Fallout 3, and I set it down and walked away victorious when I got the Dream Crusher perk. So, in solidarity, I'm going to guess that. Does Blackjack become a Dream Crusher?
I wish. Sadly, she gains the perk Rapid Reload, which isn't really that interesting of a perk, but it's worth talking about. That in all of the stuff that I talked about, the takeaway from at least from the author's perspective of the story is all of the violence and murder that happened. All of the characters being vehemently shot to death by Blackjack. That's the core critical takeaway from it. Like, that's a worrying precedent to set, is what I'm getting at. Like, I know that later perks get very, very goofy later on. There's some pretty funny ones, and there's a very, very specific one that I'm waiting for, and that's the main reason why I'm doing this. But yeah, I suppose that's our show. That's our first episode. So like.
Yeah. Okay. So hit me with the title of the next chapter.
All right. So I think we missed the first chapter on this timeline iteration that we're on. The first chapter of this was called Inception. The next one is called Trust.
Wait a minute. Is the author self-aware enough to realize they're like 2 fan fictions deep in this shit? Like, why else would it be called that? God damn it. Okay, all right, we're done. He's Phi. I'm Weirdington Esquire, and this has all been a terrible mistake.